Hello. Hi,
Good
welcome
morning.
to one more Signpreneur Live. This time I'll be talking to Beth Anderson and having a conversation about art in science, or at least art in science communication. Is that right, Beth?
Yes. Yeah.
Nice. Beth is the co-founder and CEO of Architect Scientific. And we were having this conversation the other day. She doesn't have a background in science, but at this point, after so many years developing science communication and coming from a very scientific environment, right, Beth? You are you know a whole lot about scientists who are building companies need to convey a message to investors or to uh, uh, the market in general, right?
Yes. I figure that by the time I die, I will have maybe the equivalent of a basic biology degree. The thing about what we do, though, is that we delve into very narrow niches in the life sciences and technology. And so we may have to go in depth on something very, very specific and pointed. That doesn't necessarily mean that we know what's right next to it, what's adjacent to it. But over the last 25 years, we've been filling in the gaps. That said, science moves forward. So we're always, like everybody, playing catch up on the new science that's coming out because paradigms change.
Right. Can you describe Beth a little bit for us what you do, in practice, and how you came about doing that? Those are actually two broad questions. You pick the one you like the best.
Um,
But yeah,
well, well, um, First, let me give you just a quick digest of who we are. We've been around for 26 years now. We started in 1997. And at the time, there was hardly anybody that was doing this kind of work that wasn't in a university. And people wondered what we were doing and why we were doing it and whether it was useful at all. And it took us several years to convince anybody that this could be a useful tool to explain science to investors and the public and other scientists. And so it was a slow ramp up. I think it probably took us maybe 5 years altogether to really get some steam going and start to develop a lot of animations. Um, I have been, as you said, I don't have a science degree. I grew up in a science family. My father was a biochemist. My brother is also in primarily proteomics at this point. Um, I lived in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which was part of the Manhattan Project during World War II, and everybody that I knew seemed to have been touched by science somehow.
oh, yeah,
And so I wandered away from that and went into the arts for many years and slowly found my way back to science, but in my on my terms. So I'm using art to further the conversation about science. And the great thing is this is now a field, and it was not a field when we started. I'm not saying that we started it, but we were some of the first that were there
right.
in terms of companies that were doing this. Um, but it's a wonderful thing to see that this has been so adopted by so many people that it is, to my mind, one of the best ways to get science across because your your brain, I mean, half of your brain is taken up with visual synthesis and interpretation of visuals. And it's one of the quickest ways to get a point across.
Right.
So we've been pushing that message for a long time, and it's wonderful to see that it's gotten such wide adoption.
When companies what kind of companies usually hire architect?
It really is all over the map. When we first started, I would say it was early stage biotech companies. So these were biotech companies that had spun out of universities and were maybe a year or two old. Um, and they needed to attract angel funding in order to get going.
Right.
And then from there, as the world of biotech emerged and started to grow up, so did we. And so we started seeing more and more mid-stage biotech companies, and then eventually late-stage biotech companies that were then positioning themselves to be acquired by pharma
Right.
if they had targets that looked like they were going to go somewhere. And so then we became visible to the pharma companies because we were doing work for these late stage biotech companies that they were interested in. And so we did some pharma, not a tremendous amount of pharma, because that's sort of a closed circuit in terms
Hmm.
of the ad agencies and marketing agencies that work with them. That's a closed loop. But we've done a fair amount of work with pharma. Also done a lot of work with universities and not only not-for-profit institutions, but other institutions like the Allen Institute for Brain Science, the Riken Center for
Hmm.
Developmental Biology in
That's
Japan.
so interesting. Hmm.
Yeah, so it spans a huge spectrum. And as far as the type of work that we'll do, it's for either IPOs and roadshows to uh, communication across fields within the scientific community or the tech community, to patient education, to lay public outreach for museums and science centers. So it's a huge,
All
huge
over. Yeah.
spectrum.
Which is like you brought up a point that is, I think it's interesting to discuss, which is the role of the agencies with pharma and how architect is actually quite different from that, right? It's,
Well, I mean, I would say that animations fall into two general categories, and this is super general. One is MOAs, proof of principle animations that are seeking to explain what a particular drug target or drug or technology does, usually immunologically, but there are other cases as well. And then the other one is explaining basic science concepts. So explaining central dogma, explaining how things within the immune system work and how that's all set up. So these are not touting anything new particularly. This is information that's been understood for a while, and there are things that are being added to those fields, but there is an underlying understanding of how they work. And so, for example, with the works that we've done for Nature in London, those are all explaining very basic concepts of immunology in different systems in the body.
right. I was thinking that this could be a good time for me to show the audience a clip.
Sure.
The clip you sent me. Let me see if I can make this work. It's not usually, I don't usually share my screen here,
Okay.
but yeah, let's try this. Huh. Oh, okay. Please. Let me see. Share screen. Let me try and find the right window. Oh, here it is. Yeah, let me see. It should work.
Okay.
Are you seeing my screen?
I am. I am.
Okay. Let me see if you can hear this sound. Can you?
No.
No sound?
No, unfortunately.
Okay, let me keep just let it, let's
Yeah,
just
just
let it
let it go.
play. This is so nice.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a compilation of animations we've done
Uh-huh.
over, well, some of them stretch fairly far back, but new ones, old ones.
Right. The nature video here.
Hmm. Yeah, that was immunology of the gut. That was for the Allen Brain Institute. That was interesting. We got to see
Uh-huh.
a real brain. That was very interesting. This was for a TED talk that they gave.
Uh-huh. Oh,
And
yeah, like I'm mesmerized. Like because for me, I have the audio, so it's like a very immersive audio. I'll try to figure out how to make it play with audio, but
that's okay.
in the I'm curious, not that I want to tap into any secrets, but how do you do this? Like, is that like, does it take a lot of drawing or like,
Um, no, these are, well, yes and no. So typically, the process with most 3D animation companies is they start out figuring out what the animation is going to be, and then they create storyboards that basically are a point by point still that shows, it's usually hand drawn, that shows what the action is going to be. And from there, we end up, once everybody has signed off on that, then we start developing the models. And these are done in 3D packages like Maya, Autodesk Max,
uh-huh,
Blender, Houdini. Um, I mean, there are a number of different ones, but those are sort of the main ones that are out there. And so it's a little weird because you are building three-dimensional models on a flat 2D plane because you're looking at a desktop, right? So you have X, Y, and Z, and you can rotate around things and move around things, but you're doing so from a flat screen. And one of the things I'm really interested in with VR is the idea that you can actually take, there are a number of products out there that you can go into a VR space and you can paint, you can build models you're in 3D, you're walking around it, and it's got dimensionality. And that's a lot of fun. We've done some of that, and I have been waiting for that for 25 years. And it's so
for
nice
that
now.
technology, you mean like
Yes, waiting for the
the
technology
VR?
to get good enough because we went to a SIGGRAPH conference. Gosh, it has to have been 20 years ago. And there
That's when
was,
Silicon Graphics was like was
oh,
super hot.
yeah, SIGGRAPH, not SIGGRAPH,
No,
SIGGRAPH,
SIGGRAPH. It's I thought it
SIGGRAPH.
was the same.
No, not, sorry, misspoke. SIGGRAPH down in LA, they had their big meeting, and we went down there and we saw a demonstration that I think was being put together by a university, and I can't remember which one. And they had a product called Muse, and it was essentially a VR space. But VR was so new at that point, and the refresh rate on the headsets was so bad that if you turned your head, you felt really sick.
Yeah.
So we waited. We waited for 20 years for VR to get to the point where it's fast enough and it's good enough that you can actually function in it and not feel bad.
I still
But
get
anyway,
dizzy with the new. I don't know if like my son uses one to play. It's
yeah,
probably not the best, but it gets me dizzy.
it some people it does. It's a completely personal thing. It just is. It depends on your ocular distance and whether or not the headset is good at whether you can actually move them close enough in
Hmm.
or far enough apart to
Right.
be right. And then the other one is just your vestibular system.
Hmm.
How is your vestibular system set up? And can you be in an environment like that? I can't be in there for longer than about a half an hour, and then I have to leave for a little while and come
And
back.
also there's like a pressure on the face
Yes,
that is kind of.
yes, they have systems which are basically like a weight that you can stick on the back of it that will keep it from
Oh, okay. Like a
from
counterweight.
yeah, it's a counterweight, and that helps a great deal. But still, the whole thing is pretty heavy.
Yeah.
So I think before it becomes truly widely adopted, they're going to have to solve the issue of the weight.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
it's already good enough for you to produce and develop those
it
those
is.
video animations, right?
It is. I wouldn't say we spend a ton of time in there. We're still doing most of the modeling that we're doing using Max and now Unreal Engine, which is a game engine that we do all of the rendering
Mm-hmm.
in. Um, but I digressed, as I want to do. So I just wanted to go back and just tell you, because you had asked me how
Right.
we do what we do. So we model these models. We model three-dimensional objects. We get them signed off on by the client, and we build the library of objects that we need to build.
Okay.
And then we start populating scenes with all of those objects to create each particular shot. So
Okay.
it's a very iterative process. It generally takes for a 3 minute sort of standard complexity animation. It may take us 2 months, which is very fast. It may take us 6 months, which is pretty slow. But it just depends on how complex it is, how whether there are any changes that occur. And sometimes that happens because sometimes science changes in the middle of a project
Right.
and then find out,
You
oh,
have to rebuild the models,
we
perhaps,
have
or
it's a different story. That doesn't happen very often, but it has happened a few times. Um, and so as I said, it's an iterative process. We'll build the models, we'll create the scenes, we'll do what are just default renderings with just gray materials so somebody can see the action. We'll put all those together so that somebody can see what the flow of the whole animation will look like. And if everything is okay, then we go back to each scene and then we begin to apply materials and colors and lighting and camera motion. And then we finally render the whole thing out. And these are, 30 frame per second renders.
right.
And we stitch them together in After Effects. And then we pull everything into Premiere and output the movie. I would say that the introduction and the availability of the Unreal Engine has upped our game exponentially because the rendering used to be one of the longest parts of the whole thing.
Very lengthy. Yeah.
Yeah, if you had to render in Max or Maya, you had to render it out and then see if there were any mistakes. And there usually were little mistakes here and there that you had to re-render. And that could be days, weeks, or months, depending on how long the project was and how heavy each scene was, how many polygons were in each scene.
Mm-hmm.
So with Unreal, what might take you, say, for example, you had a scene that was going to take you 2 weeks to render, and you're rendering HD, so 1920 by 1080, 30 frames a second, and you've got a shot that's 900 frames long. And each shot is taking you something like 4 to 5 minutes to do. Each frame is taking you 4 to 5 minutes to do. That's going to quickly add up. Well, you could build the same thing in Unreal, and it might take you a half an hour to
Wow.
render the whole thing.
What is it? What is Unreal? Is it like a software or hardware or
Software, it is a game engine.
it is a game?
So it was
Yeah, I've
it was
seen it.
created by Epic Games,
Uh-huh.
and it's been around for a very long time, and it's free. It's available. I mean, if you start to create games that create more revenue than a certain amount, and I don't know what that is, then you have to pay a certain amount to use the engine. But for everybody else, it's free. And so it just is a three-dimensional space where you can bring models in, you can light them, texture them, move them around, you can animate them, and output them. And it has shaved up to a third of the total time it takes us to get a product done than it was 5 years ago, for example.
Well, it's
Yeah.
amazing. I don't know what the basis for the software are, but it's quite revolutionary, like considering the amount of time it saves you.
Oh yeah, I mean, every animation company that has not moved over to Unreal or Unity, which is the other sort of heavy hitter in terms of game engines,
Uh-huh.
um, is missing out,
Yeah.
just because you lose so much time trying to render in these old packages.
And what about the music? I see that you have like all these keyboards, and do you create a music as well?
We do. Not always. Sometimes we'll buy, um, off the shelf music beds just if we don't have time. I so my background is sort of scattershot. I started out as a ballet dancer, did that for about 13 years until I had too many injuries and had to quit.
Oh.
Went into rock and roll. I know that's a leap, but I did. Went into rock and roll, did that for about 15 years, and then retooled. Decided that I wanted to be a 3D animator, and so I went back to school and learned how to do it and started this company. Um, yeah, it's it's been a strange circuitous route.
But those are the most interesting, I think. And now,
Well,
yeah.
yeah, it's either that or jack of all trades, master of none, which I've heard an awful lot. But music has never sort of been far from the surface. Um, we actually do quite a bit of music. We do, in another iteration of us, we do music that no one knows us in, no one knows what we do here in that space and vice versa. They are, they are walled off from one another. They may not always be, but they are right now. And that's kind of fun because
Uh-huh.
we get to, we get to, I wouldn't say be different people, but uh, we get to show different sides of us.
Yeah, and that's amazing, I think. No matter what they call you, like what they say, I think this is a great way to explore life and having experiences in life.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I sympathize. I feel like I'm a little bit of that too. A little bit
Well,
artistic.
yeah, what you told me about your history, I mean, you, you've, it sounds like you've stayed sort of within the giant envelope of science, but you're doing very, very different things within it.
Yeah, I've been doing things in digital health. Now I have this initiative which is the Sciencepreneur. The whole idea behind the Sciencepreneur community and initiative is to empower scientists who want to start companies, who want to start their own ventures,
Yeah.
and for you to be able to help them, you have to be quite generalist and like I have a broad understanding of what they're doing, because if you're too focused on
Yeah.
just one thing, you can't really help anyone with because you are focused on your own thing, so I think that entrepreneurs in general, which I consider myself to be, they
Mhm.
can't be too much focused on just one thing. Like if they are running a company and depending on the stage of the company, you have to be really focused on that specific company so it will
Yeah.
succeed.
Mhm.
um, but that's you, that's kind of like that's your day job. On the side, you have to be learning, always learning and exploring and becoming more knowledgeable about a whole set of different things,
Yeah.
because you never really know what's going to be required in your next project, or even your company
Yeah.
might need, like I have to understand a whole lot about different aspects of the company to be able to properly run it, right?
Yeah, I think that the thing that can be a little bit um, daunting for some people who are starting a company, and again, this may be different depending on the field, but I think that there are some generalities that can be made here. With us, for example, we have had to walk this very fine line between learning what it is that these people do and still retaining the standpoint of a layman
Mm-hmm.
because when you get too deep in the weeds, it's very difficult to pull out sometimes. And that's what we run into with almost all of these scientists, is that they have to live in the details because the details are what matter. And they have to be digging that deep all the time to understand the whole thing. But it's a rare person who can pull out of that and look from the 20,000-foot view and
Hmm.
see what the overall ramifications of it are, how other people may view it, um, and to remember what it's like to not understand that particular thing. That is the most difficult thing to hold on to, is to remember what it's like to not understand a particular thing.
Because you know what happens like with doctors and scientists, overachieving people, is that they know they have the capacity to do practically anything.
Yep.
And then when the need comes, they assume they are ready to do anything.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
but that's really not true, because you've been like so focused on a specific thing, like and doing something else. Yes, you can do it, but it can take like it'll take a long time to be
Yep.
ready for those things. Yeah.
That's true. I mean, I that's always been a very interesting thing to me, is this dichotomy in science, and I'm going to get myself in trouble by saying this, but the dichotomy between having to be extremely sure of yourself and have the fortitude to be able to push forward in spite of the fact that your hypothesis may be getting hammered by everybody. To have that, and at the same time to still be able to be open and receptive to new ideas. Because I have found that scientists are both the most open in terms of learning new things, and at the same time, the most paradigm bound people I have ever met. I've met some people who absolutely cannot let go of a particular thought process that is damaging them and damaging their company. They just can't.
That's so common, to the point that sometimes I personally uh, trace this parallel between science and religion. It can become it,
Yeah,
science can become a matter of faith, like it,
it
very
can.
easily, very
Yeah,
easily.
it can. And you know, there's that tipping point that I think is extremely difficult to teach, where do you know when you've reached the tipping point that your idea is not going to work?
Right.
And you know, this is, to me, I always pick the analogy of a fly fisherman. I have done fly fishing in the past, and I found that there was a very interesting thing that would take over. It's a little, again, I'm going to get myself in trouble. This is a little bit like the gambling response. So you're fly fishing and you go, okay, the next cast, I'm going to catch a fish. Okay, the next one. Okay, the next one. So it's feeding you to keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. And you get this sort of singularity of purpose moving forward, and you stop paying attention to any little red flags that are popping up that are saying this might not work.
Right.
And so that, you know, I'd say most of the people that we deal with are very reasonable, rational people, and they know this. They know that they need to be careful about whether what they're doing is actually going to work or not. And I'm sure in the middle of the night, everybody's got these fears of, oh boy, is this going to work?
Right.
Um, but it's knowing when to pay attention to all the signs out there and say, this is not going to happen. There's, you know, either the technology's not far enough ahead yet for us to be able to develop the technologies and the methods to be able to uncover these issues, or it just simply isn't, there isn't an answer there.
Right.
But it, you know, so I realized that I always have this very um, soft spot in my heart for scientists because it's a lonely road. I mean,
Yeah,
if you've got a hypothesis or a theory that you're pushing forward, you have to have a very strong gut to put
e-
up with everything that's going to come your way from the rest of the world that's going to look at it and go, nah, that's not going to work.
exactly. It's
You
like
know?
being an entrepreneur. Being a scientist is a lonely road, and being an entrepreneur also is a lonely road. It's
Yeah.
so, and being a sciencepreneur or a science entrepreneur, it can be very daunting. Like can be very challenging.
It can. I mean, I always think it's worth it just simply because I love the idea of building something. Um, I think I think that's a real human trait. I think that people are happiest when they are building something.
Yeah, that's my case for sure.
Yeah, yeah, it is mine too. I mean, I have been a serial entrepreneur. I mean, this is the fourth business that I've had, and I learned along the way. Failed miserably on other projects, other ideas. Learned. I think that it's a terrible thing if somebody is a first time entrepreneur and it works
It
because you
makes
don't know about failure yet.
Yeah, and because that's a good point because you can be a first time entrepreneur and make it work,
Yeah.
but it also and then you have that feeling that it was all about you, like you did it right. So how come other people are so stupid, right? Like they can make their work.
Yeah.
So in the it is interesting because when you are a scientist, I think one of the differences is being in academia means that your success depends a lot on you, on
Yeah.
yourself and what you do, a lot of on your own effort, your personal
Hmm.
effort.
Hmm.
But then when you set up a company to go to the market and to sell a product, and that product has to resonate with the market, it has to there has to be a need, a pain, and then you
Yeah.
realize how difficult it is to make people pay for anything at all,
Yeah.
and then you start and then you have to build a team, and it's no longer only you, and it's not like when you're in science you can have a lab in your team in the lab, but there is a structure there, and the structure kind of it's you're dealing with peers most of the time, and the peers will respect you and they will have respect for people who work for you in your lab. But when you go to business, then it's like you're gonna be dealing with people who are not necessarily your peers. Like they might come from very different backgrounds and have a very different understanding of about the company and the market and the strategy and all of that. And then you start realizing that your success no longer depends only on you,
Yeah.
but on a myriad of variables and circumstances and things that are totally out of your control. And
Yes. Yeah. You do. You do. You begin to realize that you are, it isn't about you anymore. It is this idea that you've hatched. And I'm a big proponent of the idea that ideas literally take on life. And sometimes they take on life and they snowball and they get really big.
yeah,
And most of the time they roll along for a little while and then they slowly lose steam. And that's most ideas, I think. But there are a number of them that really take off. And I had something happen before I went back to school that sort of informed how I was going to think about all of this, how I was going to think about invention and discovery. And I read a book. I'm a big sci-fi fan, and I read a book called The Postman by David Brin.
mm,
And the summation of it is there's a man, this is post-apocalyptic world. There's been a huge war. society's broken down, and this guy is just sort of wandering around trying to survive. And he goes through the woods and he comes across this Jeep with a mailman in it who's died. And he takes his jacket because he's cold, and he wanders into this little encampment, and people say, "Oh, are you a postman?" He goes, "No, no, I'm not a postman." Oh, and they refused to believe that he wasn't a postman because he represented something that still represented society. And so they would hand him these letters and say, "Well, if you're going to the next village, can you just take these letters?" And he go, "Oh, okay, fine." And for the majority of the book, he was this unwilling agent of change. He did not want to be known as this. He just wanted to live out the rest of his life and try and survive. But in the end, he ended up restarting the postal system and rebuilding society because of communication. And that I came away from reading that book with one overarching theme, and that is every single thing that we interact with in this world that was man made came out of somebody's head.
Exactly.
Everything. And I used to use this analogy like a pen. Okay, somebody had to figure out how to design this pen. Not only did they have to do that, they had to figure out how to build the machines to create each part of this machine and put it together and make it work and make it attractive. Now, that means that everything that you see, however silly, however just run of the mill, started as an idea in one person's mind. It was usually not one person that ended up creating the whole thing, but it began in one person's mind. And I thought, oh my God, that is the most important point I've ever learned, is that everything starts in one person's mind. So I thought, I was in school and I thought, I'm going to start a company and I'm going to call it Architect. And we're going to be doing science and technology videos. We're not going to do Saturday morning cartoons or TV commercials or anything like that. We're just going to focus on science and technology. And for 2 years at this school that I went to, Art Institute, I told everybody who would listen to me that I was going to start this company. And this is the name, and this is what we're going to do, and these are the kinds of projects that we're going to work on. And people were like, yeah, I'm going to go work at Pixar. Yeah, I'm going to work at ILM. Yeah, I'm going to work for Disney. And I thought, fine, go for it. That's great. That's not what I want to do. And by the end of the 2 years, underclassmen were coming up to me who I didn't know and saying, I've heard about this company called Architect and they're hiring. Do you know anything about them? And I thought, oh my God, this idea got floated out into the world and it's alive now. I got to start it. I have to start this company because it exists in the minds of other people. And so I graduated and I spent 3 months after graduation pulling together all the content that I could, figuring out how to brand the company, putting together a portfolio, going out and talking to people, and actually doing the legwork of getting the company going. But my long-winded point in all of this is that was the greatest powerful idea I had ever been given in my whole life. And if there's one thing that I want to get across to anybody in the world, is that you come up with an idea, and if obviously, if the time is right, if there is a need for it, and if you've got the stones to be able to get out there and push it, you can do this. You don't have to rely on somebody else to do it. You can do it.
You
And
are the creator, right?
you are the creator. And it took me, I was 38 when I learned that lesson. And I wish I had learned that lesson in my 20s, because all I knew before then was I had to go work for somebody else. I
Right.
couldn't possibly start something myself. How? You know? So I wish that there were, I know there are some systems in place for sort of engaging people in the idea of becoming entrepreneurs, and yours is one of them. It's, getting somebody over that hump of the mentality of I must work for somebody else for the rest of my life to, oh, I could actually work for myself. And now with the gig economy, everybody literally could be their own boss, working with as a collaborator or a vendor to somebody else.
Yeah. My feeling is that society, people in general, are learning that they can be creators. They can rely on them or on themselves,
Yep.
and that's so nice because you realize that at the end of the day, your life is all your creation, right?
Yep.
And then it's okay. You can work for others, and you can participate in other people's creation, and that's
Yes.
fine.
Yes.
But it's nice to know you always have the option, and it's your choice essentially. Like, it's not because you couldn't be creating your own things. It's just because you really enjoy be participating in other people's creation, which is different than I need a job.
It is. It is. And, this sort of, to me, this points to another issue, which is the art side of things. I am a friend of mine went and spent quite a bit of time in Bali. And when she came back, she told me an interesting story that I'd never heard before. She said, in Bali, everybody has basically two things. They've got the job that they've got to do to put food on the table. And then everybody is expected to pick a particular art that they gravitate to.
Oh, really?
And they basically spend their whole lives perfecting that art. And when they die, no one talks about the job that they had. They talk about the art that they did.
I had no idea. That's
Yeah. And I
interesting.
think,
Hmm.
I don't know if it's countrywide, but I mean, this
Uh-huh.
was something that she ran into. And I thought, it's not going to solve all of the world's ills, but if everybody had an outlet for expression that made them feel happy and made them feel like they were developing something of beauty, I think that people would be a lot less stressed out,
Yeah,
you
I
know?
agree. Yeah, because they are closer and more aware of the creator capacity, of their creative side, of their creator nature.
Yes, which everybody has. Everybody has, but unfortunately, I think it's drummed out of a lot of people. I was very lucky. I did not have parents who said, "You can't be a dancer, you can't be a musician, you can't do these things. You've got to go get a real job."
Mhm.
Fortunately, my parents were not like that. I knew a lot of people whose parents were. No, you're not going to do that. You're going to go and get a
And that
law.
gets imprinted in your mind.
Yeah,
It's
you
hard to
have
get
to
rid of it.
go do that. And I mean, the realities of life are you must earn a living. Yes, there are a lot of different ways to do that. And it doesn't mean, even if you go the straight and narrow route of going through high school, going through college, going through graduate school, getting your degree, and staying on that road, that doesn't mean you can't also develop these other sides of you.
Exactly.
And that's sort of missing.
Unless you get super focused and you won't allow yourself to do anything else
Right, which a
and
lot of
be
people
or
do.
be anything else. You're like
Yeah,
limiting yourself in a sense.
yeah, that's true. But I mean, there are an awful lot of people whose professions are their passion. And so for them, it's both work and hobby. It's all
Yeah.
of it. And
Yeah.
that's great. I
Yeah.
mean, that's sort of me. I cannot get enough of 3D. I've been doing this for 25 years and I'm still fascinated by it.
That's boring.
And that's, yeah, I haven't gotten bored yet. So,
But if you do, eventually you certainly gonna find something,
oh, I'll go
the
do
next
something.
thing.
I'll go be well, it's too late to be It's too late to be a MotoGP racer. That's not in the cards.
But you're still doing well, not a racer, but you can always enjoy the motorcycle. That's
And
so cool.
I do. But I mean, one of my big bucket lists for the next life is I want to do that. I want to be on those racetracks and I want to be doing that because that seems extremely fun and scary, but fun to me.
It's fun for sure.
So I have professions lined up for subsequent lifetimes.
I think that's great. I totally believe in that.
Yeah.
I actually believe those things are all happening right now. Actually, all of those lives. I don't
Ah,
necessarily think they happen in a sequence.
so do you believe in the many worlds, many universes
Yeah,
happening
I
concurrently?
I don't like the term like believing or not believing,
Yeah.
because that's kind of uh, dogmatic in a sense.
Mhm. Yeah.
I like to believe that I am open to these ideas.
Hmm.
So, and there's a whole lot of ideas that can really be probed by science, at least not by the way science works today.
Yeah.
So many worlds hypothesis is one of them.
Hmm.
More like a scientific, because science, there are many limitations to science. For example, science won't let you study anything that is beyond this universe by
Yeah.
definition.
Right.
And also, science by definition is restricted to matter. In
Yeah.
everything that is immaterial, it's very hard for science to study. So, for example, even like when I was a neurologist, I am technically I am still a neurologist, but when I practiced neurology,
Yeah.
like I used to, and that's how doctors still do that to this day. If you want to know how much pain a patient is in, you ask them from like in a scale from 0 1 to 10, how bad is your pain, right?
Yeah.
We do that because there's no real there's no proper way to assess. It doesn't have to be something like pain. It could be something like love. How much do you love me?
Yeah.
On a scale from 1 to 10. And how can that's not science. I mean, that's
Yeah.
what happens in science is that you're dealing with correlates of realities and things that are really not up to science to probe. In
Yeah.
the love, fear, like a hate, being some of those things that happen at some realm that is not very scientific. It's not very material. And
Yeah.
so I like to explore all of the. So I do that. I like to explore those themes because I'm very one of my passions is consciousness and study of consciousness. And
Oh, that's a good subject.
does the brain generate consciousness? That's
Yeah.
the current understanding. I personally don't think that's the case. I don't think we have enough evidence for that.
I don't
Uh,
either. I don't
yeah.
either. I think that I used to have an argument with my dad. A nice argument, not a drop dead argument, but a nice one. And we would talk about consciousness and we would talk about things that are difficult to explain using traditional science. And uh, I was talking about the fact that I had undergone surgery a long time ago. And I remember waking up and being about 8 feet above the operating table and seeing myself and seeing the doctors and hearing them talk and watching what they were doing. And when I finally came out of it and I was back in the hospital room and the doctors came in, um, I said, you know, how did it go? And they said, oh, we'll tell you later. And I said, well, I told them what I heard. And they said, there's no way you could have. I said, I was watching you. So I talked to dad about this and he said, that's just not possible. And I said, well, it was one of the more real things that I have experienced in my life. And he said, that's just no way of proving it. I said, okay, so let's talk about dark matter and dark energy. So 15 years ago, nobody had any idea that dark matter or dark energy existed. Are you telling me that simply because we didn't have the instrumentation to probe it, Does that mean it didn't exist until we could probe it? Is this the tree falling in the forest that if no one hears it, it doesn't make a sound? And he said, as far as trying to put together a framework in science, it doesn't exist. And I said, that's crazy.
That's
It,
so limiting.
and he said, but there's no other way to build a framework of understanding. And I said,
Yeah.
it's not building a framework of understanding, it's just leaving the door open to say, this might be a possibility. So I, about, oh God, maybe 17 years ago, we worked with a quantum physicist at the University of Vienna who's really, really interesting, super bright guy. And we kept in touch over the years, and we wound up over the last couple of years building a VR experience to explain superpositioning and quantum mechanics, and which was just the most amazing rabbit hole to go down,
Uh-huh.
especially in VR. Anyway, it was interesting because I came out of that after having to read a ton about it and then have him explain different things. I thought, okay, if the current idea of, the singularity that basically exploded into the universe that we have now, or multiple universes, was a singularity at one point, what about the idea that if that singularity exploded, and if superpositioning is actually a thing where one object can be in more than one place at the same time, what about the idea that we are all everything, are all facets of the same singularity at the same time, having all of these disparate experiences? Which for me is wonderful because it sort of solves the problem of, are we alone? Well, maybe not. Maybe we're all just really one thing. And I'm trying very hard not to move into the religious realm here because I'm a little uncomfortable with it.
Mhm.
But the idea that if we are simply facets of the same thing that is endlessly regenerating and endlessly experiencing, then that means that nothing ever actually dies. And that also means that possibly, not reincarnation in its sort of standard form, but that there is this sort of recycling of assets. And we're all wound up in that. And it makes me happy because I think, okay, well, it sort of satisfies the religious part of it, and it sort of satisfies the physics part of it, and they all kind of mush together. And one last thing I want to say, and then I'm gonna be quiet, is
That's okay. That's good.
um,
Awesome.
there's a science fiction writer named Neil Stephenson who's also a futurist. He lives in Seattle. He's brilliant. He's written all kinds of fascinating books, like Diamond Age, just amazing, Snow Crash. And he put together a book of essays that he had written over a long period of time. And my brother sent me that book and he said, you got to read this. This is really interesting. There was one essay in there that just blew my mind. He had been investigating these letters that were written between Isaac Newton's acolyte, I don't know what you would call him, sort of, he was another physicist named Clark, who was hanging around Newton and thought he was super cool, and Leibniz, who was a German physicist.
Hmm.
And Leibniz had written to Newton saying, I think your theory is absolutely wrong. I think your theory is not right. And Newton didn't want to bother to respond to him, so he put Clark onto that. And Clark and Leibniz generated these super long letters for about a year and a half until Leibniz passed away. But those letters have been translated, and it's fascinating because Clark is propounding Isaac Newton's theory and says, this is the way everything works in the universe. And Leibniz was saying, no, 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 that's not the case. The fundamental particle is not an atom, it is a monad. And a monad is the fundamental particle of the universe, and they are all self-directed. And they all decide to work together to
Con-
create the universe that we see and experience. And I thought, wow, that's really bizarre. Not provable right now at all, but it's a really interesting idea. And I thought, well, the guy's a quack. Okay, just I'm not going to pay any attention to it. But then I found out that Russell, who was the mathematician and philosopher around the turn of the century, took it upon himself to translate and go through and prove all of Leibniz's equations. And those equations form the basis of quantum mechanics now. What Leibniz did is the basis. So you think, okay,
and
well,
that is by Neil
huh?
Stephenson. And all of those letters are those in a book by Neil
No,
Stephenson.
no, no. He just wrote about them. I have not
Oh, okay.
read the letters themselves, and I want to find them because I think they would be fascinating to read. Um, no, he just talks about them. But just the fact that, the guy, he may have been out of his mind regarding monads. I mean, at this point, there's no way to know. And it was, he was from a very religious background. Newton was from a very religious background. So all of that sort of colored everything that they were talking about. But still, the fact that his equations form the underpinnings of quantum mechanics means that you got to pay attention a little bit to what the guy is saying. And we may never get to the point where we can actually quantify or detect any of this. But it's just really, it's an interesting sort of philosophical discussion to have.
Yeah, I think that on your I'll just give my comments on that, and then I think we can wrap up.
Yeah.
But on the argument between you and your dad,
Yeah.
my understanding is that if you are the challenge there in the out of body experience and making sense of that,
Mm-hmm.
is that we assume that there is only one reality, and
Yeah.
that reality is shared between among all of us, and that's the real reality. So we need to make sense. Anything that happens has to emerge from that one reality.
Yeah.
Whereas there is also another way we could be seeing the world and ourselves, which is reality is it comes from consciousness, which is like this discussion like between the Newton worldview and the Leibniz worldview,
Yeah.
and consciousness could be more fundamental as a reality than the material reality, than the scientific reality, or the what I call the third person reality.
Yeah.
First person reality, what you experience during the surgery could be it is a reality for sure. I mean, you cannot deny you experience that, so it is a sort of reality,
Yeah.
and that reality could be more fundamental than the reality we share among ourselves. So,
Yeah.
and if that's the case, you couldn't really prove anything from the third person reality perspective, because the other reality, the first person reality, is more fundamental, is more uh, that's the one that's the reality that explains the third person reality. Pretty much like
Yeah.
the equations that you described by Leibniz. And the other concept that you came up with like that everything is an aspect of the same thing. That's like the concept of oneness. And
Mhm.
I, even though it's not a scientific concept, from my experience in life, my personal experience is that when you embrace and you bring those concepts to your life, oneness and others, your life actually becomes much better. So there
Oh,
must be some truth to it.
I think there is. I think everybody exists in sort of a dualistic uh, way, in that you have your own stream of reality, right?
Hmm.
It's your own stream that you're in. It's what happens inside that you are thinking,
Right.
that you either manifest or have manifested for you.
Yeah.
out there in the world. And then there is the collective stream. And so people can dip in and out of that collective stream. Some people who are
Yeah.
super lonely are only in their own little stream and they're in their own heads and they never venture out of that into the collective stream. And it's so interesting to me. For example, if you go, my brother went to a Peter Gabriel concert many, many years ago, and he spoke about how fascinating it was that when Gabriel, did his dive off of the stage backwards and everybody caught him and he literally went all the way around. I mean, there were thousands of people and he went all the way around and they got him back onto the stage. Lee said that there was the most amazing sense that happened when he did that. Up until that point, everybody was an individual enjoying it. People were having a really good time, but it was an individual experience. And when Gabriel did that, all of a sudden, Lee said it felt like a switch had happened, and everybody tuned in, and everybody became part of this collective experience and felt everybody else. And I know that most people have had that feeling once in a while where all of a sudden you realize everybody's thinking the same thing.
It's
I am,
resonating.
yeah, I'm part, yeah, we're all magnetically, neurologically resonating with one another. Um, and that is a very wonderful space to be. I don't think you can be in that collective space all the time because you've got to sort of, you know, get into your own stream and sort of figure things out for a little while and then dip back in. But it's the question is right now, with the way the world is, there are different kinds of collective streams. So there are very positive collective streams and there's extremely negative collective streams. And, you know, people get sucked into these negative collective streams, which amplify and reinforce really, really bad behaviors and bad outcomes, bad thoughts. And those become very addictive and they're very difficult to pull yourself back out of stuff like that.
Right.
So, you know, sorry, all this to say that communication is key. Without that, everybody's in their own little bubble and nobody knows what anyone else is doing. And I never thought, I guess I realize now that everything that I've been doing my whole life is about communication. I just didn't know it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Um, and that's the thing that gives me the greatest amount of joy is effectively communicating something to somebody else that they go, oh, wow, I get that. That's a big high. I like that a lot. And I hope that, I mean, we've been doing this a long time, but, hopefully we get to keep doing it for a little while longer.
Yeah, surely you will. And we hope that many other companies there are going to watch this and be part of the Signpreneur somehow in the future will take advantage of having architect and you as part of this community. Thanks so much, Beth, for
Thank you.
coming and having this interview. I love to have this conversation with you. Very insightful and very profound. I'm going to try and end this live with the video again, now with sound. Let's see if the sound plays.
Okay.
You let me know. Oh, it looks like your video doesn't have a video. Oh, yeah, it's for some reason it's not working. Oh, that's a
That's
shame.
okay. Well, people can go to the
Oh,
architect.
let's to your. This is your email,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
and
Or you
then
can find me on LinkedIn.
on LinkedIn. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Beth. And
Thank you.
I'm gonna close the our session now.
Okay. Bye bye.